What is up, everybody? This is Blue Toshi, and this show is Blue Node, which, Steven, you'll be embarrassed to know, I always forget to even name my show and introduce properly, and now I'm screwing it up again by telling people that I don't do it enough. But everybody, this is Blue Node. I'm Blue Toshi, and with me, very excited to have him in a totally different context than we usually have him. Welcome to the show, everybody. For the first time on Blue Node, I think, but certainly not the first time when it was Decentraland. So Stephen Miller, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I'm stoked to be with you, and got a lot of really incredible stuff to talk about today. I'm just excited to be in the lounge as a first time attendant.
Yeah, so this is your first Blue Node Lounge. You did Decentralands, I think, at least once, I think possibly twice, but now you're here at Blue Node Lounge. Not only you here is Stephen Miller, people would expect to see you on that show, but you're on my show now in an entirely different capacity. You're not here to talk about awesome art and awesome artists from all over the world, which, in my opinion, these aren't your words, they're mine, but I think you're the best interviewer of artists and one of the best curators certainly in Bitcoin Ordinals, and I think in the entire digital blockchain art space. So thanks for being with us.
I appreciate that, man. It's very kind of you to say. It's been a hell of a road to here, to say the least. But I'm really, really excited to be able to share with you today what I've been working on for like the better part of 6 months at the very least. But it's been a vision and a dream for a while. But yeah, I'm just excited to unpack it and show a different side.
Yeah, I can't wait either. So what Stephen is alluding to, everybody, is instead of talking about artists and breaking down their collections and the art and the code and everything about it, Stephen Miller, one of my favorite people in the space, one of my best friends in the space, has created his own art collection. And Stephen, I have to say as a preface, like, when somebody's so good at one thing, like interviewing and really talking about art, explaining art, because remember, I grew up, my mom was an art historian. So when she couldn't find a babysitter, I was the youngest kid. She would literally have me with stuffed animals behind the podium as she presented to people. So I was probably more focused on the Micronauts and the Shogun Warriors and the Justice League than I was what my mom was saying, but it did soak in. So when you came to me and said, hey, I'm launching my first collection, I was a little skeptical at first. I'm not going to lie, because can an artist, someone who talks about it, can they actually cross over and become a good generative artist or a good can they produce good art? And I was skeptical. And then you and I spoke, I think, for the first time on this when I saw my piece two and a half weeks ago. I'm not going to lie to you. My mind was blown.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting that you attack it the way that you did, because when you talk about curation, and I was in a really interesting conversation with Gerard and Studio Payment about this last week. One of the things that is really fascinating about it is like, yeah, you're not thinking about it from your own creative lens. You're thinking about it and trying to frame it through the lens of the actual artists themselves. In the case of what I have upcoming, this collection that's called Behold, it was absolutely a creative vision that I had. And it's a collection that I have curated top to bottom. Every single message, every single story that's involved is of my own making and my own history, but I had 100% creative support, and it was a pleasure to be able to collaborate with the team at Metablend Studios on bringing it to life, because I'm not a coder, but that doesn't mean that I can't necessarily find the way to collaboratively producing this collection and directing, exactly where it heads. So a huge shout out to them. It was a pleasure getting the chance to work with their team. They're just absolute professionals in the space. But yeah, getting the chance to go on a completely different journey in curation was unlike anything else I've ever done before, truly.
Well, tell me about it. So before we actually get into looking at these beautiful pieces of generative art, which, By the way, when I was actually waiting for my daughter to do dance, and that's when Steve and I have our general just hangout calls. He's like, "Dude, bring your computer this time because I want to show you something." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I brought it, hooked up, hot wired the computer to the phone to get internet, and we talked for an hour, and all I could do was look at the art. Like I couldn't look away from it. There was a big, huge dog and a big truck across the way. It would have usually distracted me quite nicely, but I couldn't look away from your art. So how long ago did when did you get inspired to start creating Behold, but when did you actually start working on it too?
So I think that the earliest thoughts and inspiration behind the collection went back to when the digest kind of hit its like true stride, right? Like I really got my start on the art, curation and advocacy side of things back in May of 2023. So by like May of
Oh, wow.
2024, after doing all like a full year of work, like just strictly supporting artists, I kind of started to have this thought of like, this doesn't get to be what it's been were it not for all of the people who have supported it, right? All the people who have come through and shown up for me, been on these shows, attended the shows, allowed me to like feature their work in the digest before anybody else. And it made me feel like this welling sense of gratitude. And I wanted to create a gratitude token, like a literal token of gratitude that I could distribute to these individuals. So premise wise, it goes back to then, but you have to remember, and I know you know this better than anybody, but it's not like I'm bringing in sponsorship revenue. It's not like I'm funded, right? I'm doing everything that I'm doing out of passion, like period. That's the exact way that I operate. And I said to myself in May, well, this is a great pipe dream, but how the hell do you make this happen without like just an insane amount of funding? Because I'm not going to be able to learn how to code at that level.
Right. And
Um,
when you say May,
so
not May of 24,
yeah,
you said May of 23?
so it was May of 24 when the idea really hit my head. But that was after a year of being like fully dedicated to just producing art-based content.
Got it. Okay. So May of
Yeah.
23 to May of 24. So basically the first year of Ordinals, if you will, it was all about learning about generative art, learning about the artist, talking about the content, and just immersing yourself fully there. Then around early summer last year, May of 24 is when the inspiration really took hold and you're like, wait, I do want to do this. And that passion just grew.
Yeah, so basically I first got into generative art, really into generative art back in like June of 2021. So like I've had an appreciation for it for a very long time, but like my actual coverage of all of digital art stemmed from May of 23, and that full year of just gestation on ideas and being able to support these artists, that's what kind of was the catalyst of saying, I really do want to find a way to express that gratitude. That's why I ended up today where I'm at. So just to give you that one little piece of clarification.
Right. I almost have to, it's clunky here, but I almost have to pull it up just so people can see it. Cause we'll get fully into it, but I just think,
Mhm.
I mean, it's so beautiful. There we go. Okay. So we're just going to put this in there. Cause it's like, I feel like I wouldn't be doing it justice if we didn't like always have it on the screen. But I mean, this art is beautiful. It's fully generative, which I think is just so cool. Um, but tell us, so you basically got the inspiration then. When did you know? I know you're working with Heavy, and we'll get into those guys in a bit. When did you know that this dream could actually become a reality? Once talking to Heavy.
Yeah, so basically, if you want to think about that timeline that we were just bringing up, the idea that I really wanted to pursue this at some point came in May of 2024. The idea that it actually could happen really came in November of 2024. I was having a meeting with Heavy, and again, like he's an incredible artist in his own right. He's the originator behind the collection MetaBlends, which spawned MetaBlend Studios, the creative studio that he runs with Rabbi Gaines. And effectively, we were having this call for his upcoming collection because he wanted me to come in and consult for him. And by the end of the call, I was like, hey, look, like I'm again still happy to assist and, help you work through some of the details on this drop. But I want to put something in front of you just idea wise. I just want to get your feedback. And what's crazy is Heavy and I go back to like mid 2022. That's when we first really connected. And through all that time, like we've just continued to support each other and be friends and show up when needed. I pitched him this idea for this collection, explained what it was that my intent was, and basically he said, "Look, I want to try something and I want to just show you it and see what you think." Blue, I shit you not. Less than 36 hours later, he dropped me the first like concept slash prototype for the work. And I was absolutely taken with it. I was over the moon. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It was the story that I was trying to tell. And you see it, you sit on screen right now. Like it's very much so a multi-layered work. It's got dimension to it, but if you're viewing it from the two-dimensional plane, you might just think that it's an eye and it's being tied back to the fact that I'm all about art discovery and helping people to explore what art exists out there. But there's a lot more behind the scenes, just as there is a lot more behind the scenes when it comes to the content that I'm putting out. So yeah, that the origins stretch back to November of 2024. And Heavy and I have just been hard at work on this thing in the background ever since.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. So when you talked to him in November of 24, it sounds like right away he got your vision and showed you a little MVP prototype of what could be done. Is that when you were like, "Oh man, this is happening. This is so cool."
I mean, it was me sitting there saying like, "Oh my God, like this is actually gonna happen." But it also like in that moment, I sat there and said, "Oh my God, what is this gonna cost me?" Um,
Yeah, for sure.
right? Like that's the natural response. But in truth, like he and I basically just sat to work with it and said, "Look, we will do this, and let's just consider this in kind work for one another." So I'm continuing to advise and assist him on his project, and he's helping me with putting this project out. And Rabbi's just roped in because Rabbi's a good dude. Just kidding. No, it's because MetaBlend Studios is a team endeavor. But yeah, that's really how it all even came to be. Because again, just as I told you, like there's no world where I could afford to develop this or like go out and conscript, a truly generative artist like Heavy is, to make something like this. This would cost like thousands upon thousands of dollars to do just from concept.
Right. I'm pulling up MetaBlend Studios as we talk. I mean, it's just it's so cool that again, like I love and I'm always going to root for people who are on the curation side, the content side, and who just eat, sleep, and breathe, art and generative art in this case. And then you actually just make that transition over to the art side. Did you, in these last couple of years, and certainly more heavily in these last 4 or 5 months, was there any doubt where you felt like an imposter, or have you always been like, I know my shit and this is awesome, and I'm working with studs at MetaBlend Studios with Rabbi and Heavy. This is just right.
I honestly didn't question it at all. I think if there's any one
Oh,
thing that I questioned, it would have just been like, when is the right moment to really bring this out? And I think that's just because we're in such a weird echo chamber on X and within the broader Web3 space right now that other people's viewpoints kind of just get lodged in the back of your head, right? Do you want to contest with X drop that could theoretically happen the same week as yours? Do you want to scale the price to a certain point? How do you want to distribute? All of those questions become really tedious. And if I questioned anything, it was my decisions on those elements. I know exactly who I am as a curator. I know exactly who I am when it comes to bringing forth like creative vision. I ran a brand identity agency for 3 years. Like from the creative side of things, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm talking about, and I don't question that. I question intent, and I knew that immediately that the intent was right. So I didn't have to go back and question it again afterwards, which was a really, really wonderful thing because I know that there's a lot of heart behind this collection. So it's really easy to not question when your heart is that much in it.
It sounds like you're saying when it's authentic to
Yeah.
you, you're like, I have to make it anyway. It's like, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The guy had the dreams and he had to make the clay blob of the
Yeah.
big Sedona like rock structure where the UFO landed. Like once you're possessed, you're possessed. And it sounds like you're saying, based on your experience and just who you are and your intention, because I know we'll get into that in a second, but again, your intention is to give back to your friends and the community and the artists and the other content creators who who you've helped along the way, so many people, but obviously we don't live in a vacuum, who have helped you along the way too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a give and take. There's push and pull in everything. And it's still something that I'm oftentimes very taken aback by in the most positive of ways. Like just sitting there wondering like, man, how did it really get to this point? And it does come back to like the energy that you put out there into the world. And it's funny that you bring up the, Close Encounters reference because it really is energy. And when I look at this artwork and I see the way that it moves, and that doesn't matter whether it's a slower speed or you ramp up that speed. When you talk about the way that you give energy and you take energy from a space from individuals, there's constantly this heartwarming gravity to it when you realize that it's equivalent, right? When the give and take is very much so fair, equal, and consistent. I don't take from anybody. At like truly, like that's one of the biggest things that I don't make it a priority. If someone's going to give, like that's a different like case entirely, but that means that I'm also giving to them in my own way. So when I see the way that these things move and the way that the patterns ebb and flow over time, it becomes really emblematic of that because in Sedona, like so much of it's about energy. I don't know if you've ever been there. I'm literally 2 hours from it. And I've been up there. I've felt the energy vortexes. I know exactly what people are talking about when they experience it. And there is that feeling in my heart when I actually am engaged with people in our space. So it's funny to be able to reflect that in its own unique little way with this within the work.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I actually took the family to Sedona 2 years ago for New Year's Eve, and we rented a place. You know that church that's on the hill that everyone visits? We were literally the house. It was like the mount right below it. We were the only house on that side of the street, and we were right next to it. And I mean, the views were insane. And I know what you mean about feeling like that energy. And Sedona's definitely got it. Another place that has it is in Colorado, in a place called Crestone, Colorado, where I think there's a church from almost every denomination in the world. I mean, Taoist, Buddhist, Christian, obviously, Judaism, you name it, there is a church there. And Crestone's not a big town. It's at the foot of they're called the Blood Mountains. I think it's the San Cristos, and it's the sky. They call them the Blood Mountains because it's blood red sky above it. There's something about the energy at that place, and everyone there's like a Reiki person and a healer. But my wife and I went there early in our marriage, and it was absolutely incredible. But yeah, Sedona definitely has those vibes as well. There's something magical about that place.
Yeah, a fun fact and a quick shout out, because I don't know if you remember it or if you recognized it, but Postbook actually featured Cathedral Rock, the specific location you're referring to, in her collection, The Astronomer's Daughter, and that's why I own the piece that I own. Like I'm obsessed with it because it's literally focused right on, dead on view to Cathedral Rock. So
Yeah, no, Astronomer's Daughter is probably one of my favorite collections, if not my favorite collection. But now she's got to look out. I've got a new one here. Like I was telling you before the show, I love art. Your art 24/7. I degen too, and I like to talk to the coders and talk to the meme coiners guys too. But for me, I like there's a lot of art collections I get excited about, but I am more excited about this one this year than any one that I can remember in a long time. And like I said, that one conversation we had for an hour while I was sitting in the car with my little clamshell Mac sitting on my dash, and you showed me my piece, which is not this one here. Mine's far more red, but I was just like, I can't stop staring at this thing. It's just like, it's beautiful. It's perfect. So your attention to detail is absolutely incredible.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, and look, like I think that the fun thing about this is like there really is something for everybody in the collection. And like that was why I was so intent on heavily curating it and making it extremely personal. Like you see how the way that it's moving right now on screen, it's like very erratic. It's fast motion. And there are plenty of people in our space that have that level of ADHD or that are just like that high energy that like this is a reflection of them. But if you slow it down and you like really look at it from a slower distortion angle, like it is a lot more emblematic of those that are more reflective, that are taking time to really meet, understand, and see the people around them in the space.
Right.
So yeah, even just from that angle, like it's a very important thing to see, but it's always more than meets the eye, like pun intended, pun very much intended, right? Because you're showing it at different angles on screen right now too, which is something that I can talk about in spaces all day long, but it's a completely different thing to just look at it and see it in real time.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about it now. It's funny that this is the beauty of visual, and I keep telling you, like, Steven, come on, let's get more into video for you because you're so like you're the most verbally expressive person. But like you said, audio spaces audio spaces are great philosophically and to really get the root of ideas, where everyone could be in their bathrobes and, whatever, drinking brandy. But seeing it, like, this is a collection you just absolutely have to see. Like, I just changed the perspective to be, underneath on that y-axis and flat across, and it's like, looks like the most delicious magic jelly belly, in the world. And then if you go kind of more of the tall way, then you've got like an obelisk, and just changing it. It's almost like, it reminds me of like almost like a planet that just had like 78 meteors hit it, and it's just in the whole atmospheres and pure turmoil. Like, or this could be like a pill. Like you said, every time you turn it and twist it, it just like, you go for the head-on view. Obviously, it looks just like an eye in space, but I told you mine almost looked like this beautiful, alive, like multicolored grapefruit. It had the concavity and the depth to it. So it's like no matter which direction you go, you could just keep staring at it. And I just got a really good matte 55-inch TV to showcase. Eternal Tides, from Phenomena and Vivid. And, it's run by a high powered computer. And the second you showed me Behold, I was like, oh man, this is the second piece I'm going to figure out to make sure I have enough RAM to make sure that this thing is displayed beautifully how it should to really capture the eye.
And hats off to Heavy and Rabbi for this little detail of it as well, because I told you about this right before we hopped on the stream, but they actually built in a like detector that basically can tell how much RAM you have free at any given moment to be able to actually display it optimally. So it is kind of scaling for however much like memory your computer or your device for that matter has at any one given moment. So it was an important factor that we did want to consider in. So I'm really really pleased with how that element of it came out. But with what you were talking about just before that, Blue, like it's one of my favorite parts about all of this and the story that we're telling here. It's that like, and I mentioned this directly in our trailer. It's that what we ultimately see depends on what we're looking for. And that's one of the craziest parts about art for me personally, especially in the generative category. So because art makes us see, it makes us see ourselves, it makes us see others, it makes us see through things that we make up about our own selves and our world. But even it allows us to see what may not be visible to others. The observation about it looking like a jelly belly, like I definitely wouldn't have put that together because my mind immediately goes more cosmic with it. When you tip that thing on a like 45-degree angle, my brain immediately starts seeing auroras. And that's just, a really interesting thing. But beyond what is visually seen, it can also help you see what can't be said or what can only be felt. And that's the really incredible thing about this because it is a reflection of the world around us. Your piece, the piece that I specifically curated for you, that is literally a reflection, at least to me, of a very big part of who you are. It's why the colors reflect the way that they do. Because I wanted you to know through that piece that not only do you make me feel seen, but I see you for who you are, right? All of those messages are intertwined and betwixt within it. Now you're showing off the really crazy
The
shit on
rainbow
screen.
mode. Can I get to mine, or because I see it says number one? I'm just at the website here. Can I do that, or no? It still has to be manually punched in.
So I would have to manually punch it in right now, but I can certainly try to help you get it up on screen quickly if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, let's try it.
So I will go ahead and put into our chat your exact color codes, and you can just plug and pump them in. But for while I'm trying to pull all this up, the really interesting thing about this collection, like I had mentioned, is the degree of curation that went into it. And I've seen plenty of people do stuff like this, so I'm by no means the first to do it. But when I look around and I see what's possible within generative art, I'm obviously inspired by all the individuals who have come before me in this, specific category, but a lot of them have approached it from the perspective of long form generative art, meaning that they're relying very heavily on, you know, randomization factors, different vectors that are very much so um, in like directly randomized on chain. And I think there's a place for that. But with this collection, I didn't necessarily want it to be all long form. I wanted to get my hands dirty with it, but I also wanted to allow for other people to get their hands dirty with it. And that's why you see this composer over on the left-hand side. That composer is a parametric composer, meaning that any individual who is going to be a recipient of our airdrop, because we're airdropping approximately 40% of the collection, they will be able to go into this application and immediately start tweaking all of those parameters to specifically curate their own output. And that's, again, not something necessarily new. We saw it over on Ethereum on a couple of different instances, namely with a collection by Tyler Hobbs and Dandelion Whist called QQL. And it was a phenomenal first experiment that kind of paved the way for parametric expression. But we have not to this point seen it done like this on Bitcoin. And I'm really, really proud to be able to kind of deliver that experience to the Bitcoiners and the people who collect art on Bitcoin.
Yeah, this is incredible. I'll pretend like I listened to everything you just said, but it's your fault because once you start playing with these dials, it's like you get lost. No wonder you blew me off in our call yesterday. You're just like, you're probably just sitting here just like, oh, dials, rainbow mode. It's just so cool. Like this is super low distortion, everyone. So this is like, and you can see that slow rotation there. But it's just, there's so many pieces to this. But no, I remember, Tyler Hobbs, the QQL or QQR, what it was called. I actually, I think I had one. I played around with it a bunch, or maybe I played around with the engine, never found something I liked and saw what other people were putting out. I'm like, all right, well, they're either spending a lot of time on it or they're way better at changing variables than I am. But, the stuff that spit out from that was so cool. This is cool. This almost looks like, almost has that like dandelion effect, like the dandelion, the piece that you don't want for your lawn is just about to fly away. It's just so cool. Like the amount of attention to detail. And like you have every angle. Like if your art project was just like this and we could play around with it, like that would have been cool. Like when I go iris size large, it makes the donut much thinner, and then you've got it spread out more. So it's, it's like an eye or a big tire. But if you go medium, then it gets wider, and it gets even wider with small. So it's almost like a much bigger, fatter tire. Which one's the most iris like? Probably medium. But
Yeah,
it's
I kind of go between medium and large in that regard. I honestly am not even sure if we're gonna really have small reflected in the collection too terribly much. And I think it's because like it does too much doubling. And it's a weird effect that
hmm.
I've only come to learn about by compulsively researching toruses over the course of the last 6 months. Because the shape itself is a torus, in case like you're at home wondering like how the hell do you come up with a donut from math? And the truth is it's an existing structure, but when you get a torus's center point to kind of come to such a closed degree, it will naturally inside start to have this like doubling effect, and it eventually leads to something that's called hop vibration. And I don't understand what the fuck any of that means. But I'll tell you this, it looks fucking incredible
It
when you
does,
actually begin to
man.
watch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is so cool. Now I see what you mean. So when people get their people lucky enough to get an allow list and get these, most of the ones you curate, you're saying will not be small, because large and medium just has more of the aesthetic than the look you're going for. Will there be any smalls? I assume you're going to have a couple peppered in there.
Yeah, so we very well may. I think I'm probably just going to leave it open for those that are receiving the airdrop, and I can get into that in a little bit because there is different levels of, I guess, engagement and how people are going to find themselves interacting with this work. I can get into that in a little bit, but just so that you know, if you're looking for your colors and you want to start plugging that stuff in, go ahead into our text and you can find the whole makeup of it right there in
Oh,
our
here we
text
go.
messages.
Yep. So I have to go
But yeah, like,
primary. Okay, you keep talking.
but while you're working through that, I'll kind of give a little bit of detail on that. Like I was explaining that like there's different ways that generative art has been iterated upon and delivered across all L1s for that matter. You run into like the concepts of long form, mid form, like heavy curation, co-curation. I wanted this collection to be a very, very interesting standalone example that you don't need to just choose one. And the cool thing is that Bitcoin can actually allow you to do that. I'm not sure that I've seen that delivered all inside of one collection on Ethereum. And I've studied the living shit out of the generative art category. So like believe me when I say it, like I've done the diligence. I definitely don't think I've seen it all put into one full collection the way that this is going to ultimately be delivered on Bitcoin. So within that collection, I would think of it in two groups. There is the more randomized long form format, which is going to include curated outputs. Those are all going to be available for sale. And that sale date is coming up March 27th.
All right.
So you will be able to lock that in and go and simply purchase an output from the algorithm. All of those palettes have been self-curated, and the ranges that you'll find from like the level of like chromatic aberration and distortion speed, all of those things have been in fact taken into account and
Right.
curated into that long form version. But because this collection comes so much back to gratitude and me wanting to express that gratitude to
Mm-hmm.
those in the space that have impacted me significantly, each of them are going to be getting a blank slate. They'll have the opportunity to come into the composer, pick out the way they want to configure and co-curate their own output, or if they so choose, like they can list it on secondary and they can sell that opportunity downstream. But that doesn't necessarily negate or take away from the fact that I'm still giving this to them as a thank you. So I don't want them to feel like they can't do that. They're more than welcome to do that if that's what they need to do for themselves. I just want them to know that I appreciate them. But those individuals will get to come in here and choose how they want theirs to look. And then we're going to update the SAT endpoints on our end from the parent that will then reflect that on their own piece. It's a really, really cool process, and I can't wait for it. But beyond that, there is one final group, but I'm going to keep that final group a little bit close to the chest because that's coming a little bit further down the line. And it's going to be something that makes this collection a lot more long-lived than just, letting it be, it's sold, and now we're moving on to the next thing.
Right.
This collection is going to evolve very much over time.
Yeah, this is amazing. So the total collection, the number is how many?
508. And yes, there's a reason for 508. It's a nerdy reason, but
I
I'm
like
happy
that
to
you
tell you
interview
if you want to
yourself. You're
know.
like, Blue, and your next question is why 508? Well, I will tell you why 508.
Look, man, that's what happens when you and I, work in the same
I
space.
know.
I always like to continue to bat that ball back so that you can bat it as well. Yeah, the 508 of it all was actually really funny. I was very much in a toss up of what I wanted it to be, and I didn't want it to be too small. I didn't want it to be too big. So I knew the general range of where I wanted it to land, but I wanted to know why it was going to arrive at the number that it ultimately arrived at. 508 ended up becoming the number because I started doing research into computer error codes. And one of the funniest things is like when you're online and you're searching around, you're trying to find, you know, name a website, right? There's a chance that you're going to reach like a 404 bad gateway error
Right.
code.
We all know the
Well,
404s, right?
yep. But if you didn't know it, you actually see error codes up into the 500s sometimes. And when you do get these error codes, your eye turns the color typically that you see on screen right now. You get filled with rage and it turns red. Um,
Well, I know anything
so
500 because 500 is basically, because I own a development
mhm,
company. 500 is basically like, call the devs. The something big's down on the back end.
yep,
Site not found.
exactly. So the 508 error code is actually called loop detected. And I was just immediately like, well, take a look at your screen, folks. Like it's a story of like how we've not only found the loop, but we've managed to find all of them. So yeah, we decided to run with 508 strictly because we found that as a very funny little geeky joke. And I don't want to take this collection too terribly seriously, even though I do. I wanted there to be a little humor in it in small ways like that.
Right. No, it's so cool because like my son's really into science and specifically energy. He knows more through YouTube about like nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, and all that stuff, and the torus is actually in like kind of these shapes. The tokamak is very indicative probably of our next wave of energy too, which is more like the sun does, which I believe is nuclear fusion. It gets so hot that it you can actually like once you get that thing humming, I think it gets way more energy out than it gets in. And if we can master that, clean and free energy is almost like assured for civilization, which is super cool. So yet one more thing, it looks like an eye. It looks like a torus. It looks kind of like a tokamak, which is the Russian way of doing nuclear fusion. Like it's just cool because it tells you that this art, I know you don't take it seriously, but that again, there's repeating patterns in life and the
Mhm.
universe and the multiverse, and that's patterns and shapes to solve problems.
So there's a couple of things to that I do want to mention, but I do want to also remind you, make sure that you update the color mix on the left-hand side of the panel,
Okay.
between the blue and the red. Update that to 72 if you want to reflect um, closer to what, I actually originally had curated for you.
There it is. Okay. So I have the
There you
colors.
go.
I have 72. Third color mix. What should that be at?
19.
Okay. So light. Okay. Chromatic aberration.
So for aberration, and just so that everybody understands what chromatic aberration is, it's basically a means of color blending, but that's a very rudimentary way of saying it. It's a bit more complicated than that. For your piece's aberration, it was set at 8%, and distortion was set at 88,
That one I already knew. That one's already done. And then distortion
and
speed.
distortion is at 11.
Ooh, so slow. So your art for me, and some of these are my favorite numbers too. So your art for blue was because blue spazzy, the distortion speed slowed down. So this is, instead of having to get prescription for Adderall, you just gave me art, and I can look at it and be like, and be like, slow down, blue, slow down, look into the eye of Taurus.
And I think that
Yeah,
that's part of like what happened when you were in the car, right? When you were in the car that night, like I think that it did slow things down for you.
100%. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
my daughter came back in the car. I'm like, daughter, look at this. And she thought it was so cool. And yeah, this is so awesome. And then do we want to go now? Now we're getting super in the weeds, but there is something called chromeridium for specific ones. Should I flip that switch?
So I'm going to tell you right now not to flip the switch.
Okay. I
But
like it.
the only reason I'm telling you not to do it is because we're right now fine tuning it, and this is like the final beta version of our composer. So you're seeing it almost in final form, but Chromeridium is going to be something that people are going to be able to play with as they discover the collection. And just for the record, if you're wanting to go and explore this collection before it does mint and before the airdrop goes live, we are going to make the composer available from this week. So you'll be able to go in and play around with the algorithm, toggle parameters, play with it, just to get familiar with what really is possible, because it is really nearly limitless what you can do within the composer and within the algorithm, just because like you can literally play with the entire color spectrum on each of these different levels. But the reason why I don't want you to go into Chromeridium right now is because that concept is actually only going to be made available on a certain set of these outputs. And the only amount that I can tell you beyond that is there is a small subset of this collection that will evolve over time, and they're pieces that are inscribed on Black Uncommon Sats. Huge shout out to Billy Resty, who helped me secure those. I would not have been able to add that component to this collection were it not for him. Well, and the development work of Heavy.
Yeah, a big shout out. I know you've obviously, for Rabbi and Heavy and MetaBlend Studios, given a big shout out. But I got to say, as an observer here and being a friend of yours and someone who can't stop looking at the art, this will probably go down as the worst interview I've ever done, because you'll be talking. I'll be like, must spin Taurus to different directions to see what it looks like. But that said, jokes aside, shout out to Rabbi and Heavy at MetaBlend Studios. Like, you guys absolutely crushed it here. Steven's right. It's just this is such a beautiful piece of work. Like you said, Steven, it has intent. You found the right partners. And I imagine that's got to be a really good feeling, not only when you work with them, but when you're near the end here and you're like, wow, like what a good partnership. Like, we were on the same page, and our visions just merged to create something cooler than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, again, those guys are consummate professionals, and they have some of the most audacious visions for what is possible with art on Bitcoin. And I don't think that that's necessarily a criticism of others who are putting art on Bitcoin. It's simply a compliment to the fact that they're always thinking at such a high level about, how they can improve what they've already
Right.
got, how they can, theoretically do something differently. It's wild. I mean, like, it comes down to it with infrastructure and the people that build like very technically behind the scenes on the back end. Rabbi is as close to a wizard as you can possibly get, right? Like that's something that everybody needs in a collection if they're going to drop something on Bitcoin.
So he's
But
in
then
the
you look at the
RAF
creative,
ordinally LIFO
yeah,
FIFO. So he's in that elite camp of just coders, but not only good coders,
mhm,
people who care about the space and build. And
yes.
hats off to all those guys. But yeah, Rabbi and Heavy, just awesome work here.
Yeah, Heavy has a tremendous background as a creative director and a creative lead on a number of different brands. And one of the things that people don't realize that I do want to call out right now, because we produced a hell of a trailer to preview this collection over the last couple of weeks. And what people don't realize is Heavy's also like he's toured as a guitarist in a band, like in Australia. and he's an incredible musician, and he actually composed entirely originally the undertrack that we used for that trailer. So like every single little bit of like the creative vision that he and I ultimately came together to develop for this came to fruition. And it's really incredible to see that put together all in one big story like we're telling here.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like multi-dimensional artists. Like, of course, Heavy can code some of the coolest ordinals with Rabbi, and of course, he was a touring guitarist. He'd be like, "All right, you're the coolest guy in the room." But I know I've said this to you ad nauseum and to my audience, but this space, this is why the rest of the world doesn't know it yet, but this is the coolest space out there because you've got the heavies, you've got the musicians, the artists, the coders, the curators like you, and the artists. Now, Stephen, you're an artist now. Like, and you're probably like, I was always an artist. Like, does that feel good and cool? Like a lot of times, like you go to ad agencies and a lot of, in fact, I started an ad agency because I wanted to be a creative, and my dad's buddy gave me advice. He's like, "Oh, go into media. You can be in media and go talk to the creatives, see if you like that, or you can go into ad sales," because I wanted to do one or the other. And what he neglected to tell me is, if you're a creative in an ad agency, everybody else is a zero piece of shit slime, and they're not going to be like, once you're a media person, they want nothing to do with you. So it was actually pretty crappy advice. But my point is crossing that chasm from thinker, curator, interviewer, content creator guy, or just being in a space to artist is huge. So, I mean, to you, I guess it's good to take a pause and just congratulations, man. Like, good for you. You're fucking awesome.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. And it's been absolutely an insane experience just to do this. I mean, like to bring something that is of your own mind's eye and vision into the world itself is incredible. Like I've been making my own art for years and I just don't share it. Like that's the God's honest truth. The only one piece of art I've ever put out was collected by a handful of people, and there were like 39 of those pieces. And it was an edition. I released it right around the happening. And it's because a lot of the work that I did before this, in terms of like my own creative work, doing it solo, was that of like creating mosaics and working with mosaic tiling. And that's neat in its own way. But to me, like getting the chance to turn all of that into a creative vision like this is it's otherworldly. And it just opens up a lot of different possibilities, and it's why I've collected and loved generative art for as long as I have.
Yeah, it's incredible. What's the name of the piece? Because as a pal of yours, I think I want one. Let's. Where is it?
So it's up on Gamma, and it's called Modern Mythologies. I decided that I was going to put up a little homage to the beginning of the runes movement when it was officially kicked off at the happening, and I just went to work on it. I knew exactly how I wanted this specific mosaic to take form behind the rune itself, and it was just an opportunity for me to express something very different because like I again privately write poetry, and I love getting the chance to blend that with these mosaics because I think that they are a really, really interesting complement to one another. So I decided to deliver that in that moment. It was a really, really wonderful thing. But I, after that point, didn't necessarily think to myself, like, hey, I want to keep releasing mosaics on Bitcoin.
Right.
I just saw it as an opportunity to say, hey, like, this is a really fun moment in Bitcoin's history. Let's put this out. And if people buy it, people buy it. Like, and that's wonderful. I hope they enjoy it. And 39 pieces ultimately got collected. I don't know if any of them are listed. If they are, fantastic, good for you. But what Modern Mythologies holders don't know is that they actually have the only stackable Allowlist spots for Behold, which is a really cool little feature that we decided to build in. So anybody who mints on the guaranteed Allowlist phase, they're limited to one piece during that phase. If you're in the first come first serve group, you're limited to one piece. When you get to public, it's anybody's ball game. But if you do own a Modern Mythologies piece, you'll be able to mint during the guaranteed phase. And if you are already in the guaranteed phase, it'll stack. So you can actually mint multiple in the guaranteed phase if you own multiple pieces.
Wow. So
Yeah.
for the public sale, first come first serve and all that, have you thought about pricing yet? And I guess before you even tell us the price, which is obviously what everyone's going to want to know, was that hard to come up with a price for you?
So it was in some ways and it wasn't in others. Beginning with the wasn't side of it, I knew immediately that like there was no way that I was going to just do this thing as a straight up free collection. I don't believe in free minting. I think that it is absolutely degrading to the artist at the end of the day. And I knew as soon as I started working with Heavy and Rabbi, especially, that like I'm not going to put out a collection at a lower price point than their work has sold for in the past because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't
Hmm.
make any sense to sell work at a price lower than that which has already been sold by that artist because it basically creates a devaluation of their prior work in some ways. I don't want that to be a case here.
Right.
So while I have yet to make the price public, namely because I think there's a lot of different market factors that need to be considered in the lead up to launch,
Right.
I do have a range in mind, and I can tell you that range. I'm happy to tell you that range, but the final price is ultimately going to be determined a good bit by the market and the way that things look at that given moment. But we're right now looking at somewhere between, let me just actually pull up the sheet because it's literally changed day by day as we've seen the market move.
Right.
Um, to where is it? There it is. We are currently seeing a range but somewhere between 0.0025 and 0.0033. So it's going to be somewhere in that range.
Yeah. I mean, that
And
seems
again,
like with
all of that
508.
information,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, real quick. All of that information, by the way, is 100% an exclusive for Blue Node. I'm not sharing that elsewhere right now. And if people come to hear it on this show, wonderful. I wanted to be able to break on this show. That was important to me.
The price.
The price, the date, all of it.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, I'm honored, man. Like I said, I've been last week. You're like, hey, when do you want to do the show? And I'm like, I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday. You're like, how about Monday? And what did I write to you? I'm like, Monday is Monday. But it sounds like you guys start to work Monday. But for me, I was so excited about this. It doesn't even feel like a Monday today. This is, dude, this collection is so cool. And like you said, every angle that you spin it, there's just more to enjoy and to look at. And like the slower vibes are perfect for like, it's more backgroundy, but then you've got you've got it where it's moving faster. You've got the distortion, which kind of plays with it. For those who've done mushrooms, like it's certainly an homage to that. But one of my favorite things about this piece, if for folks who've been paying attention and really staring into the eye of blue in this case, you'll notice you just saw one. There's these awesome like solar flares or flashes. Tell us about that.
So the flashes themselves are really interesting because one of the things when you start working with three-dimensional generative art is you need to create depth somehow. And the way that Heavy went about that for us is he created what are effectively these floating particles, and they float in the liminal space that surrounds it within the void. And that actually does create the illusion of depth in a lot of different ways. But because of how these environments work, it requires a light source to be able to truly illuminate that object from multiple angles as you move the environment around the piece. Because as much as you may think that you're moving the piece right now, you're actually just moving where you are in relation to the piece. So the light source is coming from you, and as it catches different particles, that's how you're seeing those little flares. So it's a really neat little thing, and I really do hope that we can build in the one little secret feature that I'm hoping for, which is going to control your speed and the way, and so you basically set an auto speed of rotation and just exist with it and be able to just sit there without having to toggle it around, but see that from multiple angles and observe all the different parts of that liminal space.
Yeah, it's just so cool. Like I love that that was the first time I actually took it and zoomed it all the way out. And it has, not only did I see more flashes kind of in this universal void, but it also like the whole eye, that you can see the torus obviously way better close up, but it goes more two-dimensional here. And it's like the coolest eye. It's like, maybe humans will look like this in 250 years when we're fully chip implanted and we're part human and part universe, part machine, part organic, superhuman with these awesome, like, hey, I want these rainbow eyes. Like, but my point is here, it looks like an eye through and through, in space. I had to check, when I put this on for the first time, I'm like, I got to wipe my screen again because my screen's always dirty like everybody else's. I'm like, no, this is like, to me, it's in the universe. It's in, like you said, the void. It's in the multiverse. And it creates that much more of an air of awesomeness. Now, will people be able to, even though a lot of these, especially for the Allowlist, they will be curated. They'll be these awesome different palettes of colors. They'll still have controls to be able to spin it and to zoom in and out, correct? Like what controls will everybody have?
Yeah, so this is absolutely something that I have not talked about publicly, and I'm excited to be able to share it here. Well,
Breaking
yes,
news, everybody. Breaking news.
You can absolutely use your cursor and navigate around it manually.
Okay.
We also have built in a specific menu of different view angles, and you can also automatically move through those viewing angles. So like on a specific time basis, it can shift through those different viewing angles if you trigger that. But there's going to be 8 different viewing angles that we're going to automatically bake in case you don't want to necessarily manually manipulate it.
To get there, yeah.
Yeah, and it gives you a whole bunch of different ways of actually appreciating the work. One of them that I was really intent on including in this, just like specifically out of respect for this early Ordinals collection, was planetary Ordinals. I absolutely love that collection. I think the aesthetic is really unique, but it's a static two-dimensional piece. And with this, I wanted to honor it in terms of showing it at that similar viewing angle. So that's baked in. And you can also, of course, see it from a bunch of others. There's also going to be an auto spin feature that just allows it to simply rotate at a specific speed so you can appreciate it at different time signatures. I am not sure that we're going to be doing it nearly that fast because I don't want somebody to have a seizure.
No, but you made a good point the other day when we were having a conversation. When it spins fast enough, it actually, especially if it's fluid, obviously I'm just using a mouse, but it actually then takes on new shapes of its own.
Yeah, so there was an interesting thing that I found when I was like researching this study of like the rates per minute, like the RPMs of how fast it can spin. And when you get to a certain point, it basically takes on this principle called perceptual fusion, where it automatically loses track of the center point of the torus and gives off the illusion that it's actually an orb. So I really think that's an interesting feature. As much as I would like to include it, I don't necessarily think we're going to be able to pull it off because there's a lot of processing that already is going on screen. And I would love to make sure that it continues to function without breaking.
Steven, it'll be fine by me. Whenever my business partner in my company of 20 years taught me a long time ago, when you get a computer, however much RAM you can afford to stuff in and whatever the max RAM it'll take, stuff that RAM in for this and for every reason, but also because your computer, unless Apple just deprecates and says you can't go to the new operating system. I've got a 13-year-old Mac that literally runs like brand new and speed wise, but of course Apple's like, sorry, you can only upgrade to OS 10.10 or whatever. But my point being, the more RAM and the more cool stuff you do, the better. But I could totally see that, because you're right. This is already, like, I tried to go to MetaBlend Studios. I think because this is pretty intense, it's like Twitter. It's not letting me open Twitter. So something, there's a lot of under the hood here. Let me ask you, because I think I forgot at the beginning, what are, this is all generative code, obviously. If you were uploading this as some sort of a video or whatever, obviously you'd be like 4 megging each one. Then you'd be, not only would you be bankrupt, you'd bankrupt all of us who helped chip in to do this. How big is the generative code here? Is it light and small?
So from my understanding of it, it is going to be very, very optimized and minimized. So we're going to see this probably come in somewhere in the ballpark of like 10,000 kilobytes, which is extremely small. One of my favorite generative artists out there is Peter Pasma, and he is without question one of the most efficient coders in generative art. He is oftentimes, or at least I oftentimes refer to him as your favorite generative artist's favorite generative artist, because he's just that respected by other generative artists in space.
Right.
He's known for minifying his code specifically for like what I believe is like one of his absolute opuses. What he released on Art Blocks called Sculpture is literally 6,970 kilobytes of code, which is batshit crazy. Like,
when you say 6,000, I think you mean 6,000 bytes. 6,000 K is actually a couple megs. I think it's bytes, right? If you're saying yours is 10,000, yours is probably 10,000 bytes.
So that's probably what I'm referring to then.
Yeah, okay.
I naturally think in terms of KB is something that's smaller than MB, and I assume that that's, naturally what people are talking about.
Unless you're saying the entire, like, because if each one was 10,000 K, I think it's about 1,000 K to a megabit. So it's like 1,012, I think. So 10,000 K would be like 10 meg. If the whole collection is 10 meg, I could see that. But I'll bet it's, each one is in like bytes. I'll bet it's 10.
Yeah, it is bytes now that I come to think of it. And the only reason I know that is because there's a palette in the collection that pays homage to Sculpture, and the name of the palette is only 6,970 bytes. That's exactly what it is.
That's incredible.
So yeah.
I love, it's so cool for small file sizes. Like, my generation was the first one where they put like an old Apple computer in the classroom in like first or second grade. And there was something called Logo, which was an old design program where it would be like, they called it a turtle, but it was just a little triangle. And they'd be like, FD10, RT90, but then you'd start getting into patterns, and it was kind of an introduction to code and, kind of computer and digital art. And I had I never got into it too much. Like, I was good and the exercises, I went a little above and beyond, but I had some friends in the classroom who were making the coolest like moray patterns, where it just like, it was pretty crazy complex codes. Whether the parents gave him the equation or not, as a second grader, I imagine someone probably helped him. But I just remember being like, oh, wow, that was, it was like one of those mental notes, like, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it's incredible just how technology's advanced, but the fact that you can minify down to that type of sizing is what makes generative art on Bitcoin make so much sense. And I love it for that. I really do, because it emphasizes just how incredible Bitcoin can be for generative art, right? Because on Bitcoin, it's so hard to store high degrees of file size. Yet you can display something damn near losslessly and scalably when it comes to code in any type of viewer. It's just wild to me. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, dude, this is absolutely blue. I was so excited to have you on the show. This is for personal reasons. Like I said, I do get excited about a lot of art collections, but I don't think I've been excited for a drop as much as for this one. And the work you've put into it, Stephen, and Heavy and Rabbi and MetaBlend Studios, like, congratulations. Like, you guys have just killed this. And like you said, we were in a weird crabby market. You got the Taproot Wizards over here who are launching, and like you said, you got to really time this stuff. especially with art and generative art. But God, I cannot imagine people aren't just going to be so fired up to get this. Before we part ways today, is there anything that we haven't chatted about, or are there any questions that I forgot to ask you that you'd love for people out there to know as you launch this? The 27th, March 27th, everybody, which I believe is next Thursday. So we've got about 10 days to stew over this collection, but this one's just awesome. So anything else to share?
Yeah, so the only thing that I just want to reemphasize is just the dates are really, simple. I've tried to keep them simple at the very least. You have later this week, we'll be debuting all of the on-chain documentation. I wanted to make sure that every single curatorial note that we had for this collection was inscribed. So that'll be coming out later this week, and it'll be living within the parent-child hierarchy for the collection. I think it's just a really important note to be said because a lot of these art collections, they lose track of that over time. And if God forbid an artist passes on, the context is then left to the interpreter. And as much as that can be beautiful, I want that option to be there for them to actually have a reference point. So that's for like first and foremost. That's coming later on this week. You'll be
Right.
able to review that and you'll be able to play around within the composer very soon. I'm assuming within the next 24 to 48 hours. And beyond that, I just want to make one final statement, and it actually comes from the documentation itself.
Okay.
And it's just a very, very quick little statement. And that is basically saying that at first glance, like when you go and see this collection, it'll evoke like this vague sense of familiarity and it'll pique your inquisitive nature. And I want you to lean into that. But in a flash, literally, as you'll see on screen, that singular moment of shared curiosity gives way to a broad spectrum of individual backstories and personal experiences. On one hand, if you're a bright-eyed observer, you might relate to the composition and immediately think about the intricacy and the shape of a human eye. Yet on the other, if you're an art historian, you might equate this instinctive rush of wonder and the striking surreal void. They bear the hallmarks of, major movements like abstract romanticism and geometric liminalism. These two extremely different perspectives to approaching this work, they come with varying levels of nuance and education and experience, yet they're equally justified. That's a really, really important message that I think everybody should understand when it comes to this collection, because after all, it's only by like coming to recognize both our shared experiences and our differences that we come to refine how we interpret and come to understand beauty in any work of art. So I want you to walk away from this today thinking about that because there's really a lot of incredible artwork out there well beyond this. But share it. Go take the time to see that artist for who they are and what they're making. That's very much so ingrained in this collection.
Yeah, and it shows. I mean, like I said, this is the first show where like a lot of them I love to have the conversation and obviously we're not person to person, but it's one-on-one, it's in this studio set. This is the first one where I'm like I probably spent too much time on just us at the beginning. I'm like you just have to see this. You have to see it. But you make such a good point. Like for me, I always tell artists and not all collectors are the same, but as a collector, I love to get to see the art and then get to know the artist. And that doesn't mean I have to know everything about this collection. Obviously, you and I did a deep dive into this collection, but we also did a deep dive in who Stephen Miller is and what makes you tick. And to me, like that's the most important thing, because if I know what makes you tick and what your hobbies are and who you are and what your intent is, then the art just becomes that much more beautiful and collectible to me. And it's got that sticky factor where, a year later, you're not like, why did I mint this thing? Like, cause the hype and the KOL train told you to mint it. It's because it has soul and it has purpose way beyond just minting. So what you said, I echo, and I think they're beautiful, beautiful sentiments.
Yeah.
So
Beyond that, though, I do need to make sure that I say it. Beyond that one point, the one final thing I do need to say is thank you for having me on, Blue, because, I regard you as a very dear friend of mine, but getting the chance to do this with you today and really take people through this, it's an honor and a privilege. So I appreciate you.
well, I appreciate you, and the honor and the privilege is mine. That was a blast. So everybody, obviously, Stephen Miller. Follow him at Steve Miller _PHX. I told him to add his full address and zip code, but he said it wasn't necessary. You'll know who he is. But then he's like, remember, there's a lot of Steve Millers out there. I'm like, yeah, there's probably a lot more Steve Millers than Nolan Blutorskis. So, did I just slip my real name? Whoops. Anyway, so Steven, great to have you on this show. I cannot wait for this to launch. If there's anything I can do to help, but I can't wait to play around with these dials more. And the one you created for me was so thoughtful. Like, it just, like, you captured my essence. I love it. So thank you. You're a great friend, and thanks for being on the show, dude.
Of course, man. Looking forward to being able to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, take care. Until next time.